Well, that's me. I'm standing where I'm going to build a bike shed for my tenants. It's a two-sided bike shed, one for each tenant, and I wanted to do justice to my house, which is an 1895 Victorian house with a 5-color paint job. It's got lap siding and shingles, and it's pretty fancy. So I wanted to make a shed that would live up to the look, and it wasn't going to look like some cheap, cheesy thing, even though I don't think most people are ever going to see it. It's kind of in the backyard on the lot line with a neighbor. You can't see it from the street very much. But so I tucked it away near the heating and air equipment. This is where it's going to go, and it goes right up against the fence, almost no space between the fence and the shed. So the first thing I set about doing was making a foundation for it, which is just cement blocks on a good clay tamped down surface that I really worked hard to prepare nice and level, and use the sills themselves to do the level. They're half lapped, so everything ties together with lag bolts, and I wanted to make the sill structure really, really strong, even though it's not going to support a lot of weight, and the shed is all the weight. The contents will just be bicycles and trivial amount of weight inside. So once I got the half laps and everything bolted together, this is still the process of, I was still figuring it out at the time, getting the base in the right place, the piers, which are very close to the ground, and you wanted it to be close to the ground so that bikes could go in and out very easily. Then I put these corner braces in. They're lag bolted, and now everything is bolted together with half laps, or the angle braces actually sit on the piers themselves. Then I put in 4 floor joists with joist hangers. All this wood is pressure treated. Everything in the entire shed, with one exception I'll describe later, but it's all pressure treated. Even the floor plywood is pressure treated. And this is the only plywood in the entire building. There's no other plywood in use. And the next thing I started to do was to build the back wall, and I decided to go with board and batten on the back because I didn't want to put a lot of money into the back where I'd never see it, and put all the money in the front. So the framing is horizontal, and then the boards are nailed up. And these are really cheap Lowe's pressure treated fence boards, 6-foot fence boards. Here you see I left the dog ears on them. I cut those down later. Nailed those up onto the frame while it was lying down, and then I cut up more of the same wood and made those battens and nailed those in, one nail right down the center, but in the crack between the boards underlying them, so that everything can expand and contract independently. Here you can see it before I raised the wall up. It was really hard to raise this wall. It turned out to be so heavy I couldn't do it, and I had to use levers and jacks, and it took me probably about a good 45 minutes to get that thing vertical and get it in place. The siding goes down all the way to the bottom of the sill, so and also, since there's almost no space between the fence and the shed, I put the sealant on the bottom half of those boards because I thought maybe I wouldn't be able to paint them all the way down to the bottom. And here it is with the back wall up and the side walls in place. It's 2x4 studs, also treated. Everything's treated. Double top cap there, and this is kind of getting everything squared away. I found that it racked quite a bit, so I ended up putting angle braces on the 2 ends to keep the back nice and vertical, keep everything square. And this is the framing as it was coming together pretty nicely. I've got the framing for the center between the doors that will be put in later, and that, I think, pretty much concludes the framing portion. I was ready at that point to do the top. So I decided to have an almost flat roof. It's a 3.5-inch rise, so 1 2x4 on the front, tapering down to just the back, the top plate on the back. So 3.5-inch rise over a 4-foot width, almost a flat roof, very, very flat. And the only kind of roofing that I know that is good for that is a standing seam metal roof. Here we have another shot of the framing all done. That's actually the completed framing at that point. So the sheathing for the standing seam metal roof, it can't be treated because it would rust the metal. I was going to use copper, and I decided I was not going to put that much money into the roof of this place. So what I did is I used these are pallet boards, pallet wood, but really good pallets, 1.5 inches thick. The front and the back boards are 12 inches wide, so that I was able to achieve an overhang just from the board itself, provided the overhang on the front and the back. And they're rough sawn, and you don't have to use any kind of underlayment for the standing seam metal roof. First step is to put the drip edge on all around the perimeter, and the standing seam panels crimp around the front and the back on the two ends of the front and the back, and of course they crimp to each other. And what I did was I fashioned the roof out of this is an innovation of mine, and I don't know how it's going to work out, but I used 20-inch valley flashing. It's a pretty thin galvanized metal, and I bent those into traditional standing seam profile. And this is showing it on its way in, and so those are bent and crimped and everything as if it were a good material, but I was using a really cheap, cheesy material, and time will tell if it lasts. But it's beautiful. Really, it's very shiny, and it works perfectly. Of course, it's an excellent roof, and this is what it looks like at this point. It's a shed with a roof, watertight on the roof, and I've got a back wall, and I just have to do the doors and the two ends and all the trim. And now I got kind of fancy with the trim because I wanted it to look a lot like the house. And now the first trim boards, and by the way, any trim board that I put on, or siding or whatever, I prime front, back, sides, ends, everything's primed in advance. And I wanted to do something that was a lot like my house, where it's got these boards, these thin boards that stick out so that you never see the edge of the lap siding. It sticks out when you got the two siding boards together. They're 1.5 inches thick, and then they would stick out past the corner treatment. And so I did the same thing with the shed. I got that thin board sticking out so that the boards, the siding boards, can lap and never, you don't see the edges of them. And it really turned out well. It's not exactly like the house, because the house has a feature in the corner where the two boards come together. It's got a quarter round, a kind of another nice feature, but I didn't see any way to do that easily. So here we are with the siding going on. I used also, this is treated wood. It was pretty cheap stuff from Lowe's. They called it appearance grade, but it was kind of crappy. Had a lot of knots in it, and I don't normally do that for any kind of building on my house, but I thought, well, I'm not going to spend a lot of money on this shed, so I'll save money here and there. It's what it looks like. This is pretty much all of the trim in place. You see the framing wood is not primed, pre-primed. I did that on purpose because it was just soaking wet when I bought it. It was not kiln dried after treatment, so I wanted to give it a chance to dry. And then I got this this really, I'd say, crappy fence paint from Lowe's. Like, I don't know what it was, $8 a gallon or something. It was just really junk, and I painted the interior. This is what the back looks like with the board and batten. And I don't have an example of that on the house, so it doesn't represent the house at all. But I just didn't, that entire back cost me maybe $25 to build. And the inside, after I painted it with that fence paint, goes on really thin, really junk. I would hate to use that in the exterior thing. Now my cellar doors, what I did was I reflected all of the various shapes of the the shingles that are in the house, and I used those. I reflected that on the shed in the middle between the two doors because there was that space I didn't know exactly what to do with, and I thought, well, maybe what I'll do is I'll shingle that, and I'll use I'll use every shape that's found on the house. I got the fish scales and the, you name it, the V shape, and so I thought that actually turned out pretty well. I wasn't sure if it was going to look a little bit corny, but I did manage to somehow get the shingles into the shed. And this is what it looks like finished with, except for the latch hardware. I don't have latch hardware here yet. Interior shots, now I painted the floor so it looks nice. Now I got the hinges online from a company that makes hardware for stables and farms and that sort of thing. They're really heavy duty. Each one can hold a ton of weight, so I really overdid it. I could have used shorter ones, but I just kind of like the look of the long strap. Now the interior, how I divided it, I wanted to use every inch of space, so I didn't build out a stud wall to divide the two halves. What I did was I used that same fencing board, and this time I cut a half lap in each board so that they would overlap each other, so when they shrink you would not be able to see between the two units. Here's a little close-up of how that corner turned out, the board and batten in the back. Really looks nice for each one of those boards was like $1.25 or something, so that was the cheapest wood I think I have ever purchased in my life. And it looks good. There's no example of board and batten in the house, so I'm not reflecting the house. I was just reflecting being cheap, I guess. Some more details. As you see how it looks there, it's really quite beautiful. The doors are made out of tongue and groove porch decking. It's pressure treated porch decking, and the side that would normally be down is on the inside of the door. So it has that kind of textured look on the inside, and then the outside is flat, but you see the little edges between the boards. It's a nice look. You see how the interior paint job really finishes it off. So on the house, I've got these lilac colored paint accents here and there on the third floor, and I wanted to reflect that in the shed. And at first I painted there's like a crown molding up there that I painted with that color, and it didn't look like it was enough, so then I painted the entire underside of the overhang with it, and it looks good, and it looks nice. I wanted to get all the colors there, and I got all the colors. There's a view from my bedroom window. You see how shiny that roof is. I really ended up liking it. I'm not sure I would have liked copper more. We'll see how it holds up, and if it doesn't hold up, I'll just end up doing a copper roof. And so I still don't have there's the latch hardware showing up now in the end. And that's the finished result. I think it's quite beautiful. I think it reflects the architecture of the house and the age of the house. And it's all pressure treated wood, and I feel like it's going to last and last and last. And if I have to do anything over, I think it's going to be the roof. Well, thanks for watching.